Audible is my road trip companion.
It's kind of my quiet alone time.
Audible is a routine for me.
It's like a fun night school for adults.
I could easily be seduced into locking myself in a place where I do nothing but listen to books.
I never was interested in historical fiction before, but I'm obsessed with it now.
There are a lot of classic and big titles that I feel like I missed out. Since I don't have time to read, might as well listen.
If I want to catch up on the news or history or learn what's going on in the world, I can download a book and listen to it.
Because I listened to her story over and over again, I made the decision to go ahead and follow my own dream, which was to help other veterans.
I think there's like 180 books in my library now. It changes your perspective. It makes you a different person.
It's true. It's so true.
Download Audible and start listening today.
Hey folks, welcome to the 25th Annual Los Angeles Times Festival of Books and our virtual panel on crime fiction, The Dark Side. I'll be your moderator tonight. My name is James Queally. I'm a criminal justice reporter at the Los Angeles Times and fledgling crime novelist. Joining me tonight are three women who have written better books than mine. We've got Rachel Howzell Hall, who's a member of the Mystery Writers of America's Board of Directors and the author of several novels. Her latest work, And Now She's Gone, follows newly minted PI Grayson Sykes on a sprawling missing persons tale that starts right here in LA, but hops around a couple of different zip codes. Attica Locke, an award-winning author and screenwriter whose 2016 novel Pleasantville won the Harper Lee Prize for Legal Fiction. She's also worked on TV series you've certainly watched, including When They See Us on Netflix and Little Fires Everywhere on Hulu. Her most recent novel, Heaven My Home, is the second in her Highway 59 series, focusing on Texas Ranger Darren Matthews. Ivy Pochoda's 2018 novel Wonder Valley was a Los Angeles Times Book Prize finalist, and her latest novel, These Women, zones in on the complicated overlay of race and justice that has allowed more than one real-life serial killer to operate with impunity below the 10 freeway. You can find signed copies of each of their works at Small World Books over in Venice Beach. Ivy, Rachel, Attica, welcome to the panel.
Hey.
Thank you for having me.
For coming on. All right. Hopefully you still like me after these questions. Ivy? See, I'm hilarious. I'm killing it already. Ivy, I want to start with you, if that's all right. The crime journalist in me is a little selfish and wants the answer to this question. These Women spans a serial killer's two active periods in South LA, once in 1999, again in 2014. That immediately made me think of Lonnie Franklin, who some of our viewers might know as the Grim Sleeper, one of the all too many real-life serial predators who stalked South LA and seemed to get away with it for so long because of who they targeted. Victims the police and the media, myself included, frankly, have sometimes not written enough about. So can you talk about how much of the novel drew on cases like Franklin's or other predators in South LA and what inspired you to tackle that topic?
Well, first of all, I'm so excited to be here with two of my favorite writers. I love this panel so much. The truth is, it was entirely inspired initially by Lonnie Franklin. I moved to Los Angeles around the time that the LA Weekly was doing a lot of investigative journalism about the serial killer they dubbed the Grim Sleeper, as he came to be known. And later, what really inspired me was I watched a terrific documentary by Nick Broomfield, English documentarian, about Lonnie Franklin. And, you know, as is the case with most serial killers, Lonnie Franklin's the least interesting part of that story. But his friends and the circle around him, as portrayed in Broomfield's documentary, really spoke to something in me, this culture of denial that has to exist around a serial killer, and this culture of self-denial, because no one's listening to the women who are saying that their friends and daughters and mothers are being killed. So, you know, I was sort of inspired to tell the story of the amount of silence that surrounds a case like the Grim Sleeper, where he was active for nearly 2 decades and then dormant and then active again. I believe Rachel's also written about him, which I do need to mention, and a terrific book. You should all go read it. The title is escaping me, but I'm sure she'll remind us.
No one knows you're here.
Oh, no, thank you, Rachel. I'm so sorry. But, you know, I think that we often focus a little too much on the killer and a little too infrequently on the people who are caught up in the ripple effects of what a killer does, not just the victims, who are lying on the street, but the people who have been affected by violence. And the Grim Sleeper is a perfect example of that. It was a spree of crime that really tore apart a community and led people to believe that they were disposable. So it was entirely inspired by that, but not to the point where I thought that he deserved any sort of treatment in my book as anything but a background figure.
More than fair enough. Rachel, Ivy tossed it up to you, so that's where we're going to go next. Your latest protagonist, Grayson Sykes, also crosses paths with and is herself something of a hidden victim. At the same time, her narration made me crack up to the point that I dropped the book on more than one occasion. You wrote this darkly funny novel, but it's also emotionally wrenching, and that's kind of almost an equal measure on every other page. Everyone up here has written their share of complex characters, but Grayson's basically working with a dual identity. Can you talk about how you've juggled those two kind of voices in her, those two parts of her for 400 pages?
Right. And again, thank you all for inviting me. But I tapped into who we all are. I believe that we all have our public selves and our private selves, are the people that we think we should be for other people, and are the ones that we are when we're on the couch alone. And I wanted Grayson to be this fully formed woman that anybody can point to and say, I know her, I've been her. I wanted to look at her nicks and her imperfections and her strengths. And, part of that is going into a new job. She's a new PI and not knowing what she's doing. And because of that, her pen runs out, her phone dies. She's a little bit more flippant than she would have been. And that's partly because she's nervous. And I see us in that. I mean, who hasn't gone on a job interview and had something stuck in their teeth? Who hasn't spilled coffee on themselves when they're about to do something important? We've all worn linen and have forgotten that, linen looks bad at the end of the day. Why did I wear this? So I wanted to tap into that kind of, we're all kind of imperfect people. And in a city like Los Angeles, especially for those of us who are not natives, I am a native. So, I watched a lot of people who come here and say, this is what LA is. So I'll wear this thing, I'll talk this way. And they're trying on what Los Angeles is. And this is a city where, people come to rediscover themselves or redefine themselves. And Grayson, she's doing exactly that, trying to figure out who she is in this city and trying to find a woman who has redefined herself several times. So yeah, it's that kind of looking to who we are and what we do when we interact with one another that I like tapping into.
You just described every nightmare situation I've had on an interview, so if I'm twitching a little bit, that's why.
Now you can laugh and laugh because
the coffee
funny.
spill, the pen running out, that's too much real right here. All right, but enough about LA for the moment. Please, no one at the Times fire me for that sentence. Attica, your Highway 59 series keeps taking Ranger Matthews to far-flung corners in small towns in Texas that seem, a few decades behind where most of us should be on racial issues. So between Lark and Lake Caddo, you're writing about these locations. I imagine a lot of your readers don't have as much of a sense of place in, right, or a reference point like LA, where the other two novels we're talking about tonight. So can you take us through some of the benefits and maybe some of the hurdles in having to kind of build out a world from scratch for your readers in a place that they don't have any reference point for?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm building it out from scratch. I feel like I'm observing what's there and reflecting it back. But that actually maybe it's not true. I'm realizing that in the first book in the 59 series, Lark is a fake town set in a real county with a real county seat and all of this. And actually, Hope Town, this freedmen's community that's at the center of Heaven My Home, is also made up. So I always have something that's kind of made up, set around real places and embedded in real history. Well, there is for me great pleasure in laying all this out for the reader and in writing in such a way that hopefully feels transporting. Every time I write a book, I revisit Jane Smiley's book, 13 Ways of Looking at the Novel. And she talks about identifying what you know your book is doing so that you can lean into it. I know my books in this series are tall tales. They're meant to have a Texas Lone Star swagger, but they're also travelogues in a way. I mean to really paint the world of rural East Texas. And I find great pleasure in it. And I find mostly upsides other than people maybe thinking, wait, is this real? Is Jefferson, Texas really have a Gone with the Wind museum? Yes, they do.
Did not know that. All right, so now we're going to open it up to kind of questions for everybody. Whoever wants to jump in first, feel free. So, we're all crime writers. We're all operating in a genre that's largely been defined by the police procedural. I've been reading Michael Connelly longer than I've been writing for newspapers, and I've written a lot about police between both coasts, heroes, corrupt ones, everything in between. Each of you's touched on law enforcement in your careers and in your novels, some more than others, be it Ranger Matthews, be it Detective Perry and These Women. Rachel, you had the Lou Norton series. I kind of want to talk about the moment we're in, though. I've seen a lot of pieces, I feel like, written about this, about writing about police now at this time, in this moment when we're having this reckoning about force, about their interactions with the public. I just kind of want to hear each of your thoughts about the place of police in our genre now, be it the procedural, be it what, if anything, the past few years has changed about how you write these types of characters. So, simple, soft, not complicated question. Whoever wants to tackle that first.
I'll go.
I'll start. Oh, no, go, Rachel.
For me, Lou Norton is the cop that I think that we should have. I think for the most part, people of color, writers of color who write mystery and crime have written the proper cop. There are those cops that don't do the right thing. And we reflect that in our novels because we've lived it. Lou is the cop who grew up in my neighborhood. She, in the 80s could not drive to Glendale without beating it out of there at sunset. And there was an article actually a few days ago about Glendale and being a sunset town. She grew up in, going to Westwood and coming out to see cops when she went to go see Do the Right Thing. So she knows what it is to be on the other side of the badge. And she didn't like it. But yet here she is. And so she's into community policing. And that's how it should be. And through the books, her partner is a white guy from Colorado Springs. And so he kind of serves as the character who gets to learn about Black Los Angeles. And she tells him that just because, this young teenage girl sounds flippant to you, that's just how she talks. You don't have to come hard at her. This is just the way they interact. And so I think more writers are going to be doing that, looking at how the best cops deal with things and calling out those bad ones. And it's not, a plot device. It just is the way it is. There are some good people and bad people, and that covers cops too.
Yes, and I'd like to, first of all, apologize to any reporters who asked me, did I want to be interviewed about this in crime fiction? I said no every time without elaborating. It's because this ain't on us to fix. I just feel like, yes, it matters what we're putting in these books, but I want all of that attention focused on the police and on the people who actually can enact real change. And I just feel like it's a little navel gazing to suggest that what we're putting in these books can really shift what's happening to real people at the hands of police. In terms of my books, I said I would never write a cop. I just thought I don't get the establishment. I don't see the world from that point of view. And yet, when I came up with this idea to do this series of murders in little towns in East Texas, that I wanted to think, well, who's bringing us into the story? The Texas Rangers were the most interesting kind of law enforcement agency to do that. And I don't know where I'm going with Darren, but I do know that Darren has tapped into the reality that even though he's doing the right thing, or no, the wrong thing, I got it backwards, the wrong thing sometimes for the right reason, he is aware that he has too much power. He's aware of how sickeningly easy it is for him to plant evidence, how easy it is for him to lie and be believed. And so I think there's I certainly was writing this before this summer that we've had, where we're looking at things in this with this different lens. But I think it is embedded in me, and I think that going forward, I'm curious to look at the ways in which Darren. I'm acting like I don't write him, but I'm curious the ways in which he gets more explicit about, hey, maybe there's there's a problem with the institution itself, and that cops, period, have too much power.
I'd be curious, just quick follow up if you don't mind. Sorry, Rich. I was just curious with Darren because I did notice that about his character pretty early on. Did you go in wanting to write him from that perspective, with him kind of struggling with the power and responsibility, or is that something that just kind of naturally came out as you were crafting the first book?
It wasn't so much the struggling with navigating responsibility. He's defined by the fact that he was raised by these two twin great uncles, identical twins, and I had identical twin great uncles. And the fact that his uncles in the book, one was a former law enforcement officer, a ranger himself, and one was a criminal defense attorney. And they both believe different things about the law. One, that the law, if practiced the way that Rachel is talking about, can save Black folks. And the other uncle, who was a criminal defense attorney, thinks the law is the thing that's killing us. The laws were never meant for us. I really meant to explore that psychological split, and the metaphor of the two people who look exactly alike but are torn with their beliefs is a metaphor for me for the Black psyche as an American, that I both want to believe in the systems. I have this, God help me, patriotic bent and streak that I constantly want to slap my hand over, like, girl, wake up. No. So I wanted to explore that emotionally. And it just so happened that when you play that actively, it looks like hiding evidence and planting evidence and doing all kind of stuff like that for the greater good, supposedly.
Ivy?
Like Attica, I also swore I'd never write a cop. I mean, my books are so tangentially in the sphere of crime fiction that to write a cop seems to be treading into waters that other people have done so much better than I could even try. But, and I think that for the most part, in much more old school traditional crime fiction, the character of the cop is like this all, powerful savior who solves the crime. The focus is the crime is a problem, and then the cop comes in, or the detective, and solves it like it's a solution, as opposed to just figuring out who did it. And I don't want to be the person who says that this law enforcement solves the crime. It doesn't solve the crime. It just put an end point on this particular mystery. But I do understand that, and my editor explained to me and these women that you do need somebody who can go back and forth naturally, organically into different aspects of a story. And a police person is definitely a good, person to do that. A reporter, a lawyer, a PI. I needed somebody. But it felt a little uncomfortable for me, for the obvious reasons. I mean, I sit on my neighborhood council, or did, and we talk to the police and the community officers, and it's a fraught situation. I mean, I see the way they come down my street. I see, it doesn't make me particularly pleased, the houses they linger in front of, and I didn't want to put that in my book until I realized that a female cop would suffer the exact same issues that a woman in any workforce would, and probably to a worse extent. So a female cop, it's a job, and it's going to be a job where a woman is going to be degraded and going to have her work checked, and is going to be treated like a second-class citizen, and it's going to be questioned. And it's a great place to explore that, And I thought, when I decided that I was going to include a detective in my novel, I realized I couldn't come up with a better sort of manifestation of what it's like to be a woman in a job where you're not believed. Because being a police officer, a detective, is about truth and facts and investigation. And women all over, from, the newsroom to the sports field to the, education, are always having their opinions and their values and their judgments second guessed. And so when I realized that, I could have a female cop who's trying to do good, but is always being second guessed as the person who ties my story together, I thought, well, I damn well better put a cop in the story, because it's a perfect way to articulate this anger that I have about, our place in society. So, if the cop functions as more than just someone who tidily moves through the story and, solves things and, puts puzzles together, if they're a three-dimensional person, if they have problems, and if those problems are reflections of things that are important to examine in society, yeah, I'm all for it. But if it's just like, a cute way to get through a story and be able to go to bad neighborhoods and have like someone safely get out and like tell a story, then, we have to move on from that.
Yeah, the voyeurism, it's got to be over. All right, I want to talk about voice for a bit. All three of your novels have a deep bench of characters. Everyone's got a very distinct manner of speaking, no matter how small their role is. Ivy, this was obviously a structural choice for you since you had a number of different perspectives you were hopping between in these women. Rachel and Attica, what I really loved about both of your works was I kind of almost found this like Greek chorus quality to Grayson's coworkers, or Attica, I know I keep going back to Bluebird, but the restaurant, the folks at the restaurant in Geneva's in Lark. So I just kind of want to get maybe explain to our viewers, what kind of work goes into keeping all those voices straight or giving everybody their own little ticks, cadences, phrases. It always felt like everybody, no matter how small their role in your books, had these real distinct identities and voices. And I just kind of want to know what kind of like lifting goes into that.
I'll go. I think the secondary and tertiary characters are actually easier to write. They seem to be much more colorful and they kind of leap off the page in a lot of ways. This is the one area of writing that for me feels like I can't quite explain. I simply hear them. I just simply hear them. The only thing I could say that would go into it is being a naturally nosy person, which I am. And I like to eavesdrop quite a bit on people at stores and I'm just nosy. And so when you listen to people talk a lot, you begin to have an appreciation for the variety of ways that people speak. And if you look at the person behind you in line at TJ Maxx, of course, I can't have done this in 8 months, but you hear the way they talk. You might glance and see what shoes they're wearing. You might glance and see, is there something, what kind of nail polish, is there dirt beneath the nails? Your brain is just always kind of putting together character, like what makes people the way that they are. And so some of that just comes naturally for me, that when it's time to write, it just like a very particular distinct voice comes out for these tertiary characters. It's more work for me for the main character. And that's just spending time with them and pressing yourself to go deeper.
I'm like Attica. I collect people. I go from place to place and I listen to folks. And sometimes I'll write down what they're saying and how they're saying it. I even have my husband and my daughter in on the act. So whenever they hear or see someone interesting, they will send me a text saying, oh my God, you got to hear this, or she just said this. And I collect it and it lives in my Evernote web clipper. And when it's time to start thinking about people, I will think about, my collection of Angelinos, or if I'm in the airport and, someone's in there and they're talking, I listen. I mean, we're vampires. We writers, man, if you're around a writer and shut up, because we're going to take everything you're saying. You're going to find yourself in the page because they're everywhere. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, writers, you like staying inside and away from people. And it's like, well, if I stopped my day job, I don't know where I would get material because I'd be in the house all day. Well, I guess we are in the house all day now with quarantine, but still, yeah, no, and then it's also reading it out aloud, listening for the musicality of speech, because, both my mother and my mother-in-law are both from the South. But my mother has this Southern tick where she says, huh, after every kind of thing she says. So it'll be like, Rachel, you going to the store, huh? Something like that. But my mother-in-law, who's from Baton Rouge, she doesn't say that. So even though they're both Southern women, even within that, there are ticks and weird things that, they do with speech. So it's listening and reading it aloud, and then getting like your people to help you populate your world.
I mean, I don't have a lot more to add to this because, what they said is exactly, exactly what Attica and Rachel said is exactly how I feel. Like, I'm a voice vampire. I make my, husband absolutely nuts because I can't tune it out. It's like, I'm the enormous radio. Like, I just hear everything all the time to my detriment. I grew up in New York. I grew up in Brooklyn. People are out on the street all the time. My childhood, I'd hear their voices in my bedroom at night, on the subway. I just feel like voices are sort of the tapestry of a city. In my neighborhood here in LA, my street is very busy, although it's residential, and I hear people all the time. And I feel that it's the most fun part to write. It's sort of like the poetry in a book is just getting speech rhythm. It's where you can be the most free. And it's really important when you do voice to make sure that what the people are saying is interesting because, when you have a dialogue or a monologue or like even inner voice, it's sort of when you're moving away from the plot and having, the reader sit up and pay attention. You're like, this is important. These aren't the details of the story. What I'm saying is important. So it better be good. And voice has to nail that. Voice just can't spin your wheels and say, chit chat. We don't want to hear that. We hear enough chit chat overall. So it bears a huge burden in the story, but also it is the part that's where like the sort of free form poetry comes in. No one should really talk like we normally talk because that'd be pretty dreadful. It has to be this weird heightened version. So it's an odd challenge of like taking the voices you hear on the street and just amplifying it a little bit so it doesn't sound like repeated chatter, but some kind of like in between place where that chatter is meaningful. And I think that challenge is really exciting. And it's what I always want to do when I don't feel like writing is just like hear these characters' voices and sort of riff on it and just like push it a little bit. So, it has something, an interesting cadence or some kind of exaggeration that's not too wild.
By the way, if you're watching at home oh, sorry, Attica, go ahead, my bad.
I was just going to add, and a lot of this comes from a fundamental affection for human beings. Like sometimes I'll hear somebody do a turn of phrase, in a hallway, in an elevator, and I just have this overwhelming sense, oh my God, I love them. That was so delightful what they just said. And you just have this kind of warmth in your heart for people. So that's part of wanting to hear them, listen, and being so captivated by how specific people are. Like how each of us as individuals are so incredibly specific. And in that specificity, sometimes I feel this overwhelming warmth and affection for people.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. I was just going to say, if anyone at home is thinking, their jokes about writer dialogue vampirism is creepy, I just straight up record people. I have kept old interviews from, the newspaper side of things when I just hear somebody talking and it's like, you're not going to make the story, but I kind of think you're going to end up in a book one day, especially in Newark. So sorry, anyone in Jersey who ended up in line of sight. But all right. All of your books, deal with issues of race and privilege on some level. You're all a little bit, writing experiences that are your own, but also writing from a, diverse wealth of characters who are not. And, earlier this year, there was a big controversy around that book, American Dirt. And that's something that weighed heavily on my debut in my head, getting it right. So kind of in regards to your latest works, I was wondering if each of you could talk a little bit just about authenticity when writing characters that, are not either from your own background, your own lived experience, kind of the importance of and the steps you would take to get that right, whether it's research, whether it's sensitivity reads, it's a lot more work, I think, than people realize. And I just kind of want to, go through that for our viewers a little bit.
I should probably take this one. It's because, it seems like a big target on my back here.
I mean, that was not the intention, but I did kind of realize that as I was asking it, so.
I've gotten through about 8 months without getting this question. No, but it's a serious question.
You did choose to do a deal with a journalist. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's totally fine. One of the things I think about fiction and a story is like, I think of a story as a three-dimensional space. And like, there's not one particular way to view a story. The way I see, I always think of this book by Yi-Yun Lee called The Vagrants, and it's about a execution in China. And it's told from the perspective of various different people going to the execution, including the person being executed. And, I feel like in order to create a true version of a story, to articulate it and to explain it to a lot of different people, you have to shift perspectives, at least I do. So when I'm talking about, a serial killer, the way a relative of the serial killer feels about that serial killer versus the way a victim feels is very different. And the reader might fall in different places on that spectrum. So I need to give as many examples as possible so the reader can get into my story. And often that involves writing characters who don't necessarily come from my same background, who don't look like me, who are from different classes, races, genders, ages. I find it very hard to write people from different ages. I think, especially older characters, I think that's something people don't talk about a lot. It's very difficult. But if for me, if these characters are serving the function of the story, and if I'm using them as a way and I'm really invested in their version of my story, and it's not just a caricature, or it's not just a way to juice up the narrative, but if every perspective is trying to create a more perfect whole, I think it's a very important thing to do, to write across race and across gender and across, age and across class. Though I'm very mindful not to ever, create a character whose experience I don't understand without having firsthand knowledge of someone who is like that, or a group of people. I work in Skid Row. I have for 10 years. And, I understand that, for people who live in Skid Row, like, their story is often the only thing that belongs to them properly. It's what one of my students told me, like, I'll tell you my story, but it's the only thing I have. So when I write somebody else's story, I make sure that I'm not manipulating it or stealing it. And it's getting more and more difficult because I feel that it is there's just a lot more there's a lot more focus on this issue. It doesn't mean that I'm only going to write white characters, because I feel like that won't serve the panorama of my story. But you have to be a little more mindful about how you do it. And also, you have to make sure that what you're doing is a function of the narrative, not just sort of window dressing or set dressing. But I think it's imperative on an author, if you have a good imagination or a valid imagination, to be able to see into other people and to think very clearly and carefully about the way someone else might see the world. And you might want to check your work. But, it's something definitely worth exploring and seeing whether or not you feel you can do well.
But that's why it's also important for publishers and editors to acquire works by people who do actually have, that kind of worldview, who live in that skin, who put on that bra every day and knows what it feels like to go out into the world as a woman. When I created Lou Norton, I didn't want to create, Harry Bosch with boobs. I wanted her to be a fully formed woman who dealt with her own, issues that come with being a woman, especially in this field. For Grayson Sykes, I didn't want her to just be Philip Marlowe again with long hair. I wanted a woman who was scared and who didn't have the answers. And, so I didn't have to, fortunately, I didn't have to tap into what it is to be a Black woman, but I didn't know anything about being a detective and like being a cop. I didn't know anything about that. So I always turn to those pros who can help me with that. In my creation of Grayson Sykes, I talked with PIs, and especially David Corbett, who is an incredible writer. And he, in his former life, he was a PI. And so you do turn to the experts, those people who can help guide you. And, I'm very, I'm committed to not creating tropes of people. I don't want to just do the skim of, what it is to be a detective. No, I want to do the detective thing, but I'm also interested in who this person is and what battles and obstacles they're facing as they're doing this work.
Yes. I mean, American Dirt. Ooh, that was a lot of juice. That was, for somebody who loves drama, that was quite dramatic. But I will say this: for me, in Heaven, My Home, there are Native Americans in the story. I am not Native American. I have Native American ancestry, but not as near to me that I could call somebody up on the phone. What saved me in some ways, or let me have a sense of freedom and not to give the story away, is that the Native American characters in the story have been intermarried, generationally together with Black folks, so that there was a lack of, it was made up kind of thing, that there was a lack of kind of purity of culture because over generations they had been melding with Black folks in the area, and so that gave me a sense of freedom, that I could, make some things up. But I also, just what Rachel said about tropes, I think being a person of color or being somebody in a marginalized group, I and also it helps to know some people in your life. I have Native American friends. So like if you don't have any Black friends, I don't know how to help you, because like I know the kind of stuff that bugs the shit out of Native folks when they see it in a TV show. Like so, there was a part of me that was really checking myself to make sure I wasn't slipping into tropes about Native Americans. So I do think that constantly having a check on yourself. The other thing too is if you read a lot. If you read a lot, you realize, oh, I've heard this turn of phrase a bunch of times, or I've seen this presentation of this type of person a bazillion times. How can I read something more? How can I research something deeper? Who can I talk to so that I'm not falling into the thing that everybody lazily falls into?
Yeah.
All right. That's great.
That means getting off of Google. Don't Google stuff. Actually talk to people who, who have lived it, who have heard these things and are tired of it and are bursting at the seams to share with somebody what it's like to live this life. There are people out there. I mean, we have the internet now, we have Twitter, we have all these ways of reaching out to people. Writers should do that. You have your degrees of separation. You know someone who knows someone. Make an effort. That's our job.
I think that might just be good advice for all humans in 2020. Get off Twitter and talk to people. But all right. That too, yeah. Listening might help. All right, so I'm always curious about process. For some reason, I can only write news articles with like music blasting through my headphones, but I need silence and entirely too much coffee when I'm working on fiction. So I just kind of want to, know what your ideal writing situation was on either your latest works or just in general. Would you night or day writers, music or no music, caffeine, booze, tea? What's your ideal writing situation and circumstance?
I'll go. Ideal, well, that's like writing in a cabin in the French Alps or something, but I can't do that since our passports are worth nothing right now. But since I work a day job, I don't get to write all day, at least for my own stuff. I get up at 5:00 every morning and I feed the animals and I get my coffee and I sit at my desk and I write until 7:00. I have noticed that with working at home, I'm missing a very important part of my writing process, and that's my commute to work, from work to my daughter's soccer practice, all that. And I spend that liminal space, that time, thinking about what I'm supposed to be writing when I get to that endpoint. And I don't have it anymore. And I didn't realize that until I had to take my car into service in Santa Monica. And I'm driving, and all these ideas are just clicking, and it was working. And I'm like, oh, it's the car. I'm missing my car and just sitting in traffic and thinking about that. So writing's been, it's been great, but I am missing that time to just space out and think about my characters.
Okay, my ideal writing space, life, whatever, is, and of course everybody in the house can hear me say this, is when nobody's here. Sorry, everybody. I like to write in the house alone because it's energetically different when people are in it and people that you care about are in it. And for me, it is music 100%. I find music to be a heart opener. And I find that there's a way to train your brain to Pavlovianly, that's not a word, respond to music. And it's like I create a playlist for every book, every project. And what happens is that over time, the second you turn on a song, you kind of go, you're right there where you need to be emotionally because you've been listening to it every day when you're trying to work on the story. I have to write where there's a window. I can't be in a box. I need a window to look out of. The perfect scenario again is to have the house to myself, which means I might write for 1 hour in this chair, and I might write at a desk for 30 minutes. Then I might sit on the floor for 45 minutes. I like the idea that I can move around the house and it all belongs to me, and there's complete and total aloneness.
I'm very similar to Attica. I feel we all have kind of similar living situations. I have, one child and a husband at home, and like my dream scenario is when they both leave. I have long struggled with the idea of applying to a writing residency, but the truth of the matter is, it seems ridiculous to have to do that when I can do that at home if everyone just got the hell out of the house. I mean, I can have my own writing residency right here. The problem is they don't comply. I just, I always wanted to be a writer. I'm a social person, but I love being home. And not quite so much, but let's current circumstances notwithstanding. And I built my whole dream world to be in this office by myself writing. Even if I don't get to do it in the way I prefer, which is, as soon as possible after I take my daughter to school, I like to get back here and start working. If I have to do it now at 2 p.m. when I get a little break, I can do it, but it's in this space, it's at my desk, it's with all my stupid stuff around that God knows, need to look at for some reason. I need to have all of these books in arm's reach. Like, I'm not going to go to a coffee shop. It's too stressful. The idea of like having to go to the bathroom and leaving your computer and walking around. Yeah, it's like so stressful. Though I did realize that I've adapted a little bit more as I've, matured into this career, which is like, there's certain things I can do on the fly. There's certain types of projects or writing or editing that I can do on my iPad if I have a stolen moment, at whatever bizarre activity I used to get to do in the before times. But I work at home. I mean, that's the pleasure of being a writer. And there's a reason that, we choose these lives. And I don't need to dress it up with a whole bunch of bells and whistles and fancy residencies and writers' cabins and stuff. Like, I'm home and I love being home. And I just wish there weren't so many people and animals in this house. I mean, it would be easier.
Real. I also miss writing in hotel. Like right now during book tour, I would be in a hotel room by myself with this big bed and all my pens everywhere.
Wait a minute. You write on book tour? You don't just watch?
I know, it's crazy.
And drink wine?
It's quiet. It's just, yeah, I do. I write in the airport and I write on, I don't get much time. So I like snatch it everywhere. And it's not, I didn't say it's good writing, but it's enough that it's like, okay, I wrote today and this is fine. But, I like that because it's like Ivy, I have a daughter, a husband, a golden retriever, 2 cats, and a fish, and that's a lot of stuff in this house and their hardwood floor. So everything echoes. And so any stolen moment, yeah. And if it's a hotel room, oh my God. And there's room service, I'm in heaven. But it has to be quiet. I like quiet. I can't write with music. I tried.
Neither can I. I can't stand it. I cannot write with music either. A dead silence. Though my dogs don't comply because all 3 of them yap all day.
Attica, you actually made me curious with that because I'm like 50-50 on music writing. Lyrics or no lyrics? Like, you have a genre? Do you stick instrumental? I'm just kind of curious.
Oh,
it
no.
just depends on the work.
Lyrics. Now, don't get me wrong. I might hit a patch where I have to turn it off because I'm trying to get to something. But for the most part, I have it on the whole time. And the lyrics are there, but I don't know how to explain it. They don't bother me at all.
Wow.
Cool. I think we are getting close to the moment where we're going to take some questions from the audience. So I think I'm going to throw it over there, wait for them to pop up and see what our lovely viewers have to ask you guys. So just
I must
one
say,
second.
I want to say it publicly, Attica, your descriptions of food inspire me. Oh my God. Every time I read one of your books and there's description of soul food, I was like, can we order Doolin's today? I need it in my life. So I just wanted to say that. I say it all the time, but I've never said it to you on, like publicly.
Thank you, Rachel. And not my descriptions of liquor.
I was just going to say that. I want to go to the bar when I read your book. So like, screw the food. Like, let's go to the bar. Like, I know it's a little dangerous.
Drink, people.
Yeah.
Not gonna lie, I had a food question here and we ran out of time, but yeah, Attica, you had me starving most of the book. Not gonna lie. But also now I gotta go to Doolin's because Rich already that. So I haven't been over there in a minute. We are gonna move to audience questions now. Why don't we start with Jose? Jose just very simply wants to know, what are you all reading right now?
Oh, gosh. I'm reading this nonfiction psychology book about that experiment where the people went and faked being mentally ill and they weren't. And the whole psychiatry field changed. And I don't know why I'm reading it, but it's going to be interesting and I'm going to probably use it in some ways. I can't, when I'm actively writing a story, I cannot read fiction because then I feel like a hack and it depresses me. So I stick to nonfiction when I'm writing.
I just discovered Alyssa Cole. I'm so embarrassed to say I just discovered her. I think she might be a genius. How does she write in all these different genres? And
oh my God.
And like all this deep. I read when no one is watching, or while no one is watching, which I fucking loved. So then I was like, what else can I get my hands on? So I'm reading A Princess in Theory, and it's a romance novel, but the main character is like a scientist. I'm trying to figure out how she knows all this science stuff, and just the audacity of jumping around genres and all this kind of stuff. I'm just really into her. So I'm enjoying this woman maybe falling in love with the prince.
Mm-hmm.
When no one is watching is awesome. What a surprise. Like I had no idea. It just like arrived at my house and I read it. I loved it. I am rereading a book. I'm rereading for the third time Zadie Smith's NW. Because if you like voice, I mean, that's just a master class, and I just love that book. It's the book I want to write, but I'm never going to write that because that would just be, that's hubristic to think that could happen. But I just think that book's amazing. And there's so many different it's like, it blows my mind that she can, achieve so much and in so many different ways in the space of one novel. It's something I go back to when, I want to feel inspired and when I feel like I don't want to play by the conventional rules of story, because she sure doesn't. And it's a joy.
All right, we're going to take one from Xander. Xander would like to know, when approaching your novels, what's your writing process like? Do you know your ending when you begin writing?
I didn't.
Maniacal laughter is a good start.
I didn't know in my first 3 books, which is why they're so long, because I was finding the ending as I was writing it. But because of these Highway 59 novels, I very much wanted to feel that they were very slim and tightly coiled. I kind of have a sense of the last image. With both books, I've known the last image. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I knew the last bit of the story. But otherwise, I don't do an outline. I outline only in small little chunks. I never try to hold the whole thing. And I always believe in being willing to go off of the outline.
I feel like I can't follow Attica at any of these panels because she gets there and I'm like, what she said, The reason I'm laughing is I often don't know what I'm writing about when I'm writing about it, but I have this sort of, listen, I know nothing about music. But I tend to use this reference a lot. I feel like I have this emotional feeling of a crescendo that I want to achieve, where all these strings are coming together at the end and they're coiling in a certain way. And there's this sort of 3-dimensional sculpture of sound and plot and music and noise. And it could be an image, that would be easier. But I have this idea of how I want it to all come together. And I have no idea how to get there or what it's going to be about. Writing Wonder Valley, which is my previous novel, was an exercise in ultimate frustration. I mean, I think I called my parents at 2 a.m. my time, or 3 a.m, 6 o'clock their time, and cursed them out for allowing me to think I should be a writer, because I had no idea what's going on. I know this happened and I'm ashamed. I have an idea of just one thing. It's it's like a road trip. Like, you start in New York and you want to get to Los Angeles, so you got to like go straight for a while, then eventually take a left. And then there's a picture when you get there. So I kind of have this vague idea, but anything more than that, I would feel very stilted as I write. Like, I don't want to check all those boxes because it doesn't allow the invention to flow.
See, I'm a box checker. I'm the type that will like have a to-do list. And if I do something off the to-do list, I will write it on the to-do list and then cross it off, which means that I am an outliner. So I outline. I do allow myself to go off, off the outline, but I like the structure. I write my first drafts longhand, every single one. And so that allows, it could be a little long, but sitting at the computer and seeing little wiggly lines and seeing all my mistakes like that, it makes me nervous. And so I kind of, for my day job, I can do it. But for novels, I need the sprawl of the page where I can cross things off and write around the margins and use pens. I like pens. I like pens a lot.
I want to see your handwriting.
Yeah.
I was the kid that would have to do all the calligraphy for church people because I did the calligraphy. So I was that kid. I liked handwriting. And so I never got out of that. But yeah, I like outlines, especially since my time is so limited. I feel that I can check it off just so I see the progress and I feel good about, me doing it this way or something like that. Endings, I know the endings because it's on my outline, but sometimes it doesn't happen like that. And when it doesn't, then, I'm open to it. For Land of Shadows, I didn't know the ending until I wrote it and I started crying because the ending broke my heart. And so, it's weird how this story lives in you and you don't know what's about to happen. And then it's there and it's like, oh crap, what did I just do? And it feels good. It's a little scary though, because it is coming from some weird random place where you can't pinpoint. I don't know where stories live.
I'm not gonna lie, Rachel. I started sweating at the idea of writing a book longhand. That just tapped into some primal fear of mine. I know I made that thing about recording before, but that's mostly because my handwriting is in a language that like vaguely resembles English. Let's take it to another audience question. Let's go with Alexis. Alexis would like to know how you think that reading is not one of my strong suits, apparently. How do you think the popularity of true crime podcasts is affecting interest in books and reading?
Can I answer this in a different way? I think one of the things that people are getting out of listening to true crime podcasts is that not everything resolves neatly. And that a story spirals out in tentacles in ways that, you don't necessarily see reflected in, very old school traditional crime fiction. I think true crime podcasts are definitely, I haven't studied this, but like when I listen to them, I have come to understand that there's not always going to be a solution and that there are going to be things that, the podcasters follow that are not necessarily right in the sort of spine or core of the story that are really important. So I think, ultimately it's going to make people more generous with reading the genre that, not everything is going to be wrapped up very neat.
That's strange when you say that, like the unresolved thing. Like I've been watching Unsolved Mysteries and I get frustrated. It's like, well, why are you frustrated that the story's not solved? It says Unsolved Mysteries. And but there has to be an answer. So yeah, I think you're right that folks are okay with kind of open-ended ending, but it is still frustrating because
totally.
I mean, we've been brought up, watching Hill Street Blues and all the procedurals on TV, and everything is wrapped up, but life isn't like that. Even if the case is closed and the person's in jail, you still have victims, family members who are still mourning, and it's never over for them. For women who are, facing the most awful things in their marriage, it's not over for them. So even when something is solved, it is not solved. So I think people are understanding that too.
Okay, let's take one from Rachel.
Me?
Oh no! If you slip this one in, that would be impressive. Well, I guess we'll find out if you wanted to answer this question. Has the Black Lives Matter movement and social injustices being brought to light in the media affected your approach to your craft at all?
No, because Black lives have always mattered to me. No,
Same here.
same.
Yeah, we just put it on page. That's our job, to show just how Black Lives Matter. That's just a thing.
Fair enough. And we have one more. We have one more reader question. This is from Linda. Is the work of writing any different during this pandemic, and if so, how? So I guess, you know, I looked for the ideal writing situation before. We're all in the opposite of that now. So
It's a little different in the sense that, you know, I've already read 2 books that have the pandemic in it. And I was like, how did that happen? Like literally in June, I got a book that mentioned the pandemic. And I think the question of whether or not you're going to have to address it in fiction that's set in the future, not the near future, but like current fiction, is definitely something that weighs on me right now, because I tend to set books, you know, in Los Angeles, or I tend to send them where I'm living around the time that I'm living in. And like, it is something that I think about. I mean, writing there during the pandemic is challenging because of the, you know, family issue, but I think more as a specter of, you know, this whole year, leaking into fiction, I think, is more interesting to me than like my writing habits during the pandemic. Like, how do we address all of the things that have happened and are continuing to happen, and what place did those have in our books, is definitely something that I think authors writing right now are going to have to reckon with. Otherwise, I feel like they might, you know, if you're telling a certain type of story, you know, you're not doing it justice. And I think a lot of people are trying to figure out, you know, if you have a book come out, you know, next summer that's set this year, is that a book that, you know, mentions like the myriad crises that are going on now, or are we going to write in a vacuum where these things don't exist?
I think that would be hard for any of us who write crime and mystery, because right now crimes are being, you know, done with people who are trapped in the house with angry, bitter, violent people. And one wonderful thing about being a genre writer is reflecting this real life. I mean, I am not interested in the cute cupcakery stories where nothing really happens, but it's very cute and the cat solves the crime. It's like, well, no, crime is a real thing, and it persists because it reflects people's lives. We get to, of course, kind of sanitize it and give it some structure, but our job is to show that bad things happen to people, and sometimes good people help figure out what should happen next. And with the pandemic, you know, kids and wives and old folks and everyone's being affected by this, and we're going to have to somehow, artfully, of course, and with much sensitivity, address how how their lives have changed because of this. Changed in, you know, the day-to-day thing rather than just the national thing, yes, but, you know, not having masks and again, being with an angry husband who has lost his job and is about to strike out at her and the kids. So I'm kind of not necessarily looking forward to it. I am anxious to see how we as a genre address this crisis, just as we've addressed every other crisis that, you know, the world has gone through.
And I'll only say, we can move to another. I have nothing.
No. Sorry. I was having a little bit of internet issue. I actually didn't know. I run a little. No,
I read the question about how are we actually doing the physical act of writing during the pandemic, or what's it like, or how's it different? I think it's similar to probably what everybody's going through. There's a little bit of the fact that when you're actually in the craft, you get that little bit of escape from the real world for the time that you're doing the thing. But I'm under as much, well, I mean, I'm sitting here with relative privilege. I have clean water, I have food, I have a place to live. But our homes are being, what was that quote, this meme that was going around, that we're not working at home, we're living where we work? I think we're all feeling this sense of trying to balance so much. I have a teenager who started high school in pandemic. I have a husband who's practicing law in this house while it's just crazy. And so I'm under as much stress as probably anybody else. I think the difference, the one benefit of being a storyteller is there is a sense of escape when you fall into it. And so for a few hours a day, you can escape Twitter and our inane president and the fears and terrors of the world. Because you're writing about other fears and terrors.
Yeah. Shuffle it up. All right, folks, I think that's all the time we have for tonight. Thank you again so much to Attica, Ivy, and Rachel for joining us and tolerating me. I enjoyed the hell out of this. I hope you all did too. Remember, if you're watching this and you want to read one of our panelists' amazing novels, or more importantly, get a signed copy of one of their works, you can even check out mine. You can pick them up at Small World Books over in Venice. Thank you again so much to everybody at home watching, and again to all three of you for taking the time to spend with us tonight.
Had a ball.
Thank you.
Thank you.